Yeah, we're live. I caught my surprise there. I was adjusting my camera. Oh, that's good stuff, though. I'm getting started early tonight. It's date night. It's Saturday night. I've got to go see Lisa, most important person in my life. 6:47, so I'm about 13 minutes early, which is nice. And the big question for tonight is, first of all, cheers to everybody. Frosty cold beverage. The question for tonight for the weekend is, I put a video up today. Hopefully you guys have taken a look at it. It is on big blocks, how to make 1,000 horsepower basically. And what I did was I did it. In fact, we made quite a bit over 1,000 horsepower. Twin turbo big blocks, which is, a big block is awesome, but it's even better obviously with boost. And so I showed you how to do it with 3 different combinations. And the interesting thing about this video is that it's basically comparing or showing what the requirement is for the different boost levels based on different NA power output. So we have 3 different big block combinations. 2 of them are 454s, and the other one is a 540-inch motor. And they're at different levels of NA tune, basically. So one of them, the first one, is very, very mild. It only made 441 horsepower. It had a cam and aftermarket heads on it. It was a Gen 5, very low compression, very small camshaft. My first basically shot at doing the big bang stuff. And Alex is in the house. Robert's in the house. So it was my first effort at the big bang, and it wasn't very successful. I mean, it was successful in that I made a lot of power. It made quite a bit of power, and it showed that the big block definitely has potential. But it was not me basically putting my best foot forward. But it showed that when you have a mild combination, excuse me, because this was used in this video to illustrate, okay, we have a very mild combination. Again, starting out at only 441 NA horsepower, not very much. And it showed how much power was required to get to, in this case, the 1,000 horsepower mark. So it required almost 20 pounds of boost, or over 20 pounds, 20.7, I think, if I remember correctly. And then there was another test done on another motor. In fact, it's another motor that was prepping for big bang use. And that one made 510 horsepower. So a good bit up in power, in NA power, compared to the previous effort. That was a Gen 6 motor, not a Gen 5 hydraulic roller cam. Again, we used an aftermarket head. In this case, it was a ported set of 275 oval port dart heads. But I think that the Brodix head, well, I know because we've tested the Brodix heads. The Brodix heads used on the previous Gen 5 motor will support a lot more power than we were making. In fact, they would support 100 or 150 more horsepower. They would support a ton more power. The thing that motor had going against it was that it had a very, very mild camshaft. That 268 cam was basically a daily driver cam, and it was a flat tappet to begin with, and also was a Gen 5, so it was very low compression. So it had all kinds of things going against. So the Gen 6 motor was at least a little bit better. It had a hydraulic roller cam. It was a little bit bigger cam, and we had good heads like we had before, and we had a single plane intake. We ran EFI on it, and we ran 2. In this case, we ran in the first Gen 5 motor, in the first example with the low power output, we ran 2 76mm turbos from CX Racing. Enough to support a lot of power. We know because we've made 12 or 1,300 horsepower with those combinations. So that's what we did with the big block too. So I think that those turbos are not ideal for that application. I think that we're running into hot side flow problems. We also, in the first example, are running into valve spring issues. We didn't have enough power. We had lots and lots of boost. We had all kinds of things that were not ideal with that combination. So the second one, in the Gen 6 motor with hydraulic roller cam, much better shot at things. So we had more camshaft. We had plenty of cylinder head flow. We had a ported set of the dart heads, and we had a single plate intake. The thing that I didn't like about that, and the reason that I haven't run that as the big bang to find out how much total power it would make, is it's still not making power at a high enough engine speed. Like, I want peak power to come at 6,500 RPM. And that motor is just not revving. And the problem is we can't put a lot of camshaft in it because we have limited amount of piston to valve clearance. So I just think I have to get the right. There are 2 things that I want to try. We tried more valve spring, and that didn't seem to help the thing RPM any better. It wasn't a valve flow issue, or at least it doesn't seem to be. It might be that the factory lifters that we're using from the junkyard are not great and maybe need to be replaced, or even maybe need to be replaced with solids. I don't think so, because we've run hydraulic roller stuff way into the 7,500 range. So this shouldn't be an issue. It might be that we need a different camshaft, but I want to get this thing to make peak power, at least rev out to 6,500. And we're also going to employ, which we haven't yet, we're going to employ running the boost in relation to our RPM, in relation to engine speed. So we can get the thing to make kind of a centrifugal power curve, if you will. And that should help the thing carry and make power. It'll do two things. It'll help that make peak power at a higher engine speed, and it also will limit torque production, which we want to do on the Big Bang. But for this example, it showed that a motor that where we were starting out with more NA power, we still got over 1,000 horsepower without any problem. And we got over 1,000 horsepower, but at a much lower boost level than the first example, where we're making less NA power. And then to further put the stamp on this thing, the further seal of approval that shows that this is indeed a fact, the next motor that we ran in the video is a 540-inch blueprint crate motor, a power outer crate motor that they sell. And it comes with the camshaft that I normally recommend for big block stuff. It's a solid roller. It is the BR 300-14 camshaft, which is like a 650 lift and a 255, 262 degree duration. So it's a good enough camshaft to allow the thing to rev out. The blueprint heads it's more than enough flow for doing what we're doing. And so we're starting out with, instead of 510 horsepower, we're starting out with 650 NA horsepower. So it's and obviously a lot more torque too, which is beneficial. And it's making peak power at a higher engine speed because it has more camshaft in it. So we have a good starting point there. So we're up 140 horsepower from our middle version. And so therefore, when we add boost to that, which we did, now in the middle version, we added boost with 2 GT45 turbos. And we turned that one up. We turned that Gen 6 454 up to about 1,200 horsepower. So maybe a little more than that. I take that back. That's not right. I think we only went to about 1,000 horsepower on that one. On the first one, we turned the 276 millimeters up to over 1,200 horsepower. On this one, we ran 2 S475. So it's enough power, enough turbo to support getting near 2,000 horsepower. We only ran the 540 up to about 15 pounds, where it was about 1,300 and change. But it easily exceeded the 1,000 horsepower mark, which was kind of our benchmark for all these comparisons. It easily exceeded that at maybe just over 10 pounds. So we went from over 20, then to 16, and then to 10. And honestly, it would have been less than that, because I think it made like 1,080. So it probably would have been, 8 or 9-ish or something in there to just clip the 1,000 horsepower mark on that 540. So it illustrates perfectly, and I've done this many times. I say everybody has too. I've done this many times. And a perfect example of this also, that it takes less boost to reach any given power level with a more powerful naturally aspirated motor, is that when we put a camshaft in an LS. So if we get a junkyard LS, run it NA, and then run it under boost, we know that even with a stock cam, we add boost to it, it makes good power. But when we put a cam in it, then it makes a lot more power at the same boost level, or even obviously more power if we go up in boost. And the nice thing about a camshaft is when you put that in, if you run it at the same boost level, it's not unusual for you to get 100 or 150 extra horsepower at the same boost level, because what you're doing is starting with more NA power, and then it just gets multiplied by the boost. So it's a really big jump. And that's a perfect example and it shows exactly the same thing that this test with the 3 different big blocks show, that as we go up in NA power, it becomes easier and easier to reach that 1,000 horsepower mark, because it takes a lot less boost. And that's normally the way, and for years and years, it's the way that I've been telling people, look, this is the way that you should do it, basing all my information off of the 5-liter Ford. Look, it really needs a camshaft. It really needs cylinder heads, and it really needs a better intake, because all of those things on the 5-liter Ford back in the day were holding it back. And it's the same thing for small block Chevys, maybe up until they started doing the Vortex stuff and the LT1 stuff. At least those heads would support more than 400 horsepower. Very, very hard for like a 5-liter Ford. That stock head's not going to support 400 horsepower. It would if you maybe ported it and did a really good job on it, but otherwise, no, it's not going to do that. And even the GT40 heads, I think, would be hard pressed to get that kind of power. So a head upgrade and a cam upgrade and all that stuff, and it makes the motor, more powerful NA, and then it's easier to get to any sort of power level with boost. And this is especially the case with when you're dealing with centrifugal superchargers and stuff, where you want that added power too, even in the middle part of the curve where it will be definitely beneficial. On the LS stuff, you just put a cam in it and then add boost to it. And on a big block, it becomes much less important. It's just in relation to something else. If you look at all the power that the 540 did, you're like, oh yeah, we could certainly use more. The thing is, with all of these, where we were making 1,000 horsepower, like on the 540, we're also making 1,000 foot-pounds. So one of the things that I said in the video is that when you're making that kind of power, like let's say you build a 540 or a 496 or even a 454 and run lots of boost with it, and you're making 1,000 horsepower, and if you make it at a low enough engine speed, you're also making 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. Those are easy numbers to throw around, and everybody wants that because 1,000 is the new 500. The problem is if you have 1,000 foot-pounds and you don't have a drivetrain that will withstand 1,000 foot-pounds, especially doing some sort of drag race launch or something, you're just going to turn it into shrapnel. You're going to destroy whatever the first weak link is. You're going to destroy that. And then you're going to subsequently destroy whatever the next weakest things are in the driveline. It's going to be the rear end or the transmissions or the drive shaft or the U-joints or the axles or whatever it is. So a lot of times making the power is kind of easy, especially when you're starting with a big motor and you've got some good stuff on it, and then you add boost to it. All of a sudden, you're making some like fairly serious power levels. The other thing to consider, and the thing that I talked about in the video, is that you're not just looking at like the power levels. We would all want, like, I would love to make 1,000 horsepower at 7 pounds of boost, and that's certainly possible with the right kind of motor that you start out with. The problem with that, and also the 540 and the Gen 6 454, is that unless you do it actually with a junkyard motor and cam and springs in a big block or an LS or whatever you're doing with, that's the lowest buck way to do it. All of these other ways where you add NA power, and especially to a big block, if you have ever priced big block Chevy heads, they're not cheap. So, and if you've ever priced the hydraulic roller cam and springs and all the things that you need for that, roller rockers on the big block, because you don't want to use the bolt down stamped steel rockers, all of that stuff becomes fairly expensive. So making the NA power output, increasing that, gets costly. So then the question I posed in the video is that, do you do that? Do you try to make more NA power so that you can make whatever power level you want? Or do you just turn up the boost? Because once you have some sort of manual wastegate controller, or if you have an electronic one, good on you. That's even better. If you have some sort of bleed valve, an old aquarium fish valve or whatever you have to bleed boost, the boost is free. So if you want to add another pound or 2 pounds or 3 pounds, that's free, assuming that you have the other stuff to go with that. Are the injectors big enough? Is the pump big enough? Is your regulator sized, and is a boost reference, and all of that stuff working so that when you do go up and boost, you have the right timing and you have the right air fuel, and you're not going to break anything. So the boost is free. So you guys that are watching this video, which one would you choose? Let me know in the comments. Do you pick the free route where you just turn the boost up? And then how far can we take that? Like on the first example, we went all the way up to like 29 pounds. We went all the way up to 3 bar of boost, which is a lot. And it's not something I recommend guys running around town with. That's a fairly high boost level. And then as we go up in boost, things become more problematic. It's more likely that you would, blow the clamps off, that you would have very high charge temperature. And in the case of the one that we ran, we were running an air to water intercooler with ambient dyno water, and it was a blow through application. So we had additional charge cooling with the carburetor, which is definitely beneficial. We weren't running E85 back then. And if we were, that would be another form of charge cooling, which would then make it safer. But for me, the high boost and the high RPM stuff, that's like race stuff for me. So I lean more toward try to make some more power NA. But you can make, the other thing is, as we talked about, is do you really need 1,000 horsepower? And do you need 1,000 foot-pounds of torque? Other than an all-out drag race kind of thing, the answer normally is no, because if you want a big block powered Chevelle or truck or Camaro or whatever it is, and you have a turbo on it or turbos on it, and you want to be able to spin the tires and do donuts or whatever, you're going to be able to do that at a much lower power level and with much less of a problematic system than something that was making like 1,000 foot-pounds of torque. So if you have a big block and you run less boost in it and it's only making 700 foot-pounds of torque and 750 horsepower, something like that, that's still going to be really, really fast and more than able to, do smoky burnouts and donuts and and all of the things that you want. So the other thing to think about in all of this is not just the things that we're talking about with just power versus the amount of money that you would spend, but also what is your necessity? Do you want to make as much power as possible? If you do, you're going to lean more toward building a good motor and doing the thing correctly. Or if you're just like, and there are other guys too, don't get me wrong. There are other guys that want all of the power, but don't have the money or don't want to spend that money on it and want to do it the like high boost junkyard route. I'm going to do it and pray for the best and see what happens. That's also possible too, as we saw. If you just keep turning the boost up and it keeps responding and your drivetrain keeps holding up, you obviously can do that as well. So let me know in the comments what you guys think. Which way would you go? What is your go-to way? It doesn't have to be a big block. Could be a 4.8 or 5.3 LS. Could be a Mopar, a Magnum, Hemis, whatever. All of those things like operate under the same principle. The more power you make NA, the less boost that it takes to make any given power level. Then you just get to decide, okay, what power level do I really need to be at? What is like a realistic amount? And I don't know that's most of the guys that I talk to, most of the guys that comment or ask questions or send me emails or messages or whatever, most of those guys are guys that are just trying to get their turbo on the car and get it running. Most of the guys are not like, hey, I've got 780 horsepower and I've done everything that anybody could do with 780 horsepower. I'm getting tired of it. It's not nearly enough. I need to go 9s, 8s, 7s, whatever their number is. It definitely has to make more power and I need more. There's fewer of those guys than there are of guys where this is their first time that they're doing it, but they know that they need 1,000 horsepower and they have yet to run in or drive a car that makes 500 that actually hooks up and does all of the things that it's supposed to do with 500 horsepower. So, you have to be realistic about the things that you want and the things that you need. And do we need 1,000 horsepower? I think some of us really do, but there's not very many of those guys out there, especially in a street car, because a street car with street tires and 1,000 horsepower, and even worse, 1,000 foot-pounds of torque is going to have a lot of trouble like trying to hook up. So let's see what you guys got going on tonight. Ron, has anybody had experience with twins on a GM 3.6 liter V6? So why would you need to run twins? And if you did, they would be pretty small. Dan, you ran 29 pounds of boost on the 540 big block. No, I only ran 15 pounds on the 540. I ran 29 pounds on the Gen 5, the weak 441 NA horsepower Gen 5 454. How much nitrous have you run on the B series? I think I've only ever run like 100 shots on them. Roy, you want a twin turbo 454 C3500 tow rig. I don't know that you need twins for that. A single would work really well. If you don't want twins because it looks cool, I'm all for that as well. Kurt, how much boost do you think it would take to get a Cadillac 500 to make 500 foot-pounds? I don't know. I'd have to ask Courtney everything that he had to do to get that thing to seal. That's going to be the problem with the Cadillac, getting the thing to seal. Making 1,000 foot-pounds would be really easy because that motor already makes a lot of torque. Andy, is boost the same thing as manifold pressure? I've noticed that when we talk about supercharged or turbocharged airplane engines, they use manifold pressure. Well, their pressure might be different given their altitude, but yeah, for us, it's the same thing. The drink is delicious. Mike, my Pontiac started at 180 horsepower and running the VS 7875 hit 20 pounds at 4,000 RPM. That's a lot. That's a big turbo on 180 horsepower. David, have you dyno tested a Dart LS Next block? I have not. I've never run one of those. Your thoughts on them compared to an LSX block? I don't know. I've never run one, and I don't do all out things like that very often. The only really super throwdown, I've run LSX blocks before plenty of times. I've never tried to max one of them out. And I have run the RHS Tall Deck aluminum block, which we made the 495 or 495 inch motor out of. But again, we only ran it NA, and I didn't try to go for broke on it. I'd have to ask Brian what his favorite block is, because they've run in some of those classes where they're going to, 2,000, 2,500, whatever the number is, kind of power. Robert, I'm good running an NA small block Chevy 400 with the first TPI. Dyno Don headers, makes plenty of power in our streets. Okay, that's good. That thing should be really torquey anyway. Is that some kind of cranberry or something? Twist drink? No, it's a raspberry lemon drop. Much more manly. I took the umbrella out so people wouldn't make fun of me, but Admiral, do you know the big difference between a K20 and a K24? It's 4 different, right? Ron, my question was more about boost on a 3.6. It's you can put boost to anything. I don't know what 3.6 you're talking about, but any motor will take boost. Will you do a dimpled cylinder head port like golf balls versus smooth ports? I know Mythbusters did a whole car and it gained mile per gallon. That works on a rolling, like a golf ball. It works when the golf ball's moving through the air and rotating. I think Eric did a cylinder head like that. If you take a look at his video up, he has flow numbers on the dimpled thing. I think it's a myth. Infamous Nova, do you know what happened to Dr. J? Yeah, he went out of business. He's not doing that anymore. I don't know what he's doing now, but Bryce was working for CP, and he's working for somebody else now, though. It's not Scotch. No, this is not Scotch. I'm not really a Scotch guy. Will we see a turbo big block Ford anytime? I do want to do a turbo Ford. James, is a Gen 1 7875 cast turbo too big for a 5.3 tow rig? I'm thinking you might lag a bit. It would not be my choice for something like that. Aaron, tall deck 496. So you're doing a 496 with a tall deck block? S488 recommended fuel system for mostly street use. Is it, you have to tell me, you have to be more specific. Is it a carbureted motor, or are you doing a blow through? Is it a fuel injected motor? Mike, the 400 6.6 started at 180 horsepower, but heads, cam, piston rods probably got it to 400. And 180 horsepower would be the factory rating. It will make more than that on the engine dyno the way that we run it. Michael, Richard, I'm doing a fresh 6-liter build to a 408 stroke. We're going to run 25 or 30 pounds of boost. That's a big spread. And would like to know how good I'd like to know a good compression ratio to aim for with 317 heads. Are you porting the 317 heads? Because those are going to be kind of restrictive on a 408 stroker. I hope that you are. And I don't know what fuel you're running it on. I don't know if this is a drag race only kind of deal, if it's E85. Danny, do a top end build for 440 with solid lifters and lots of porting. No, probably will not do that. That would not be high on the list. I have a trick flow top end kit for a 440, but I probably won't do it on a 440. I probably would do it on a stroker version of that. Andy, lots of traction and weight in a 6,600 pound dually. 1,000 horse might be nice. I want to beat them LS guys, or at least 700 or 800. Are you wanting to do that? Are you, Andy, are you the one that wants to put a Cadillac in there? GMC Sierra, TBS, and NBSS intake exactly the same. Are they different? I think that they're the same. I don't know that the intake manifold is truck body style related. It might be year related. The Trailblazer SS, I think that they use that on the later motors as well. And a Trailblazer SS will bolt right onto an LM7. The only thing that's going to be different is the throttle body. Well, this is interesting. Most customers I deal with want the badge. They want the giant cam that makes no power until 10,000 RPM. That's not really a good RPM range to start with. And the thing's a total slug. It would be. It'd be terrible. The Ford guys just want the fake cam tune. So they want to pull the one plug wire and have it idle terribly. Harley Davidson guys are like that too. Alex, I'm building a twin turbo 521, 9.5 to 1 super Cobra jet heads flowing 400 on E85, trying to match a set of turbos for awesome response on the street, but not too small. 1,200 horsepower limitation due to trans. Do you want twins on that? Two of the cheap GT45s would be fine for that power level. Would you, as a customer buying a car, prefer a Rotrex V6 Mustang or a light-duty small block Ford Mustang, both making 450 to 500 horsepower, around 6,000 RPM or so? I think I would pick the V8. Dan, dimple ports work to keep the air and fuel homogenized. So do you think that there's actually something to surface finish that where that is beneficial and it's been shown and proven? Different than how dimples work on a golf ball. I would agree with that. And yes, it does work on intake ports. I don't agree that it does stuff to airflow. Do you ever do any diesels? I have not. I have only done stuff on the chassis dyno with diesels. James, I would go with something smaller than that for that power level. A GT45 probably would be okay. GMC 10 pounds of boost, is it safe on an LM7? Yeah, you need to watch the Big Bang motors and then you'll feel good about that. Just put ring gap in it. I'd like to see a Big Bang nitrous edition. You need to do a search on the channel for Big Bang nitrous motor, which I did and ended up blowing it up, but it needs to be redone. Do you need to change the tune when adding headers? Sometimes, yes. Sometimes the headers will add enough power down low, sometimes 15 or 20 foot-pounds down low, depending on what the application is. And sometimes that requires a change in the amount of fuel that you have to provide. Is 601 too big for boost? I don't know what 601 is. Is that the displacement or is that the cam lift? In either case, the answer is no. There's not a cam. The lift of the cam, if it's a cam, can never be too big for boost. And if it's displacement, then yeah, it needs boost, right? JB, hey Richard, what are your thoughts on crankcase evac system at the header collectors versus your typical PCV with a catch can? Would either be better for the engine? I've only seen people running the like header evac systems. I've only ever seen that done one time, and I've seen guys hook them up for drag race cars. But I like just a system where we run it over to a catch can. That's normally what we do on the dyno. Kyle, when you're done with all the other guys, that's a long list of stuff. Would you consider a Merc Cruiser 3.7 4-cylinder for projects? It's aluminum block, small block Chevy valves, and uses a 464 cylinder, a 460 Ford big block Chevy head. I'm very familiar with the motor. In fact, we talked about this. Mahovitz and I talked about this years and years ago to try to do this because he was looking into this. And in fact, I think it was Sean Carlson was looking into that for one of the import classes because it had to be a 4-cylinder, and they knew what kind of power potential or what the head would flow because you could put almost any 460 head on it, and they had 460 heads that were flowing, 500 or 550 CFM, that kind of thing. So he was looking into that, and I thought it would be good. I just don't have one of those, and we think it will be a fair bit of work to make that thing do it. And honestly, guys that are using that are not using them for racing very much. I don't think. I think that more guys are using them as the boat engines that they were designed for. Jim, Gen 453, sloppy stage 2 cam, 7875, and an S10, 373 gears. Is the turbo too big? No, it's not. Matt runs that all the time, and it works well. On a 4.8, it can get a lot more laggy, especially with that camshaft. But on a 5.3, that should work fairly fine, especially if you have the truck intake manifold and not a high ram or something like that. That's going to soften it up even more. Mike, how much boost is the Trailblazer SS intake able to handle? I don't know. We've run 25 or 30 pounds with them, I think. Rush. Hey, Richard, I finally got on the sloppy 1.5 for my LR4. Very excited, but the gaskets, the cam that came with it do not include the cam plate cover gaskets. Should I order this separately? What do you recommend? I don't. If you need a gasket, you should get it. They have those at the dealership. They actually have them at any auto parts store. They're pretty easy to get. Andy, if you have a 489 with a scat cast crank, I don't think you're not going to hurt the crank with power. We run cast crank stuff all the time, and we usually break the rod. Like if you look at all the big bang stuff, we break the rod or the piston. We don't hurt the crank, so I think you're probably fine with the cast crank. So Dan, do you honestly think that the surface finish in the head port keeps the fuel in and out of the suspension? Casey, this isn't salt. I don't put salt on it. It's actually sugar. That's the way that a raspberry lemon drop works. Otherwise, if you don't, you use a lemon or a lime for the edge and then dip it in sugar and then pour the drink in. And if you don't, if you use salt or something else, then it loses all of its power. Did you find if suspended fuel injectors, shower injection, gained any horsepower? I don't know what you mean by that. What I will tell you is different injector placement definitely changes power. So the farther away you put the injector from the valve, it tends to gain power. There's probably a limit there, but when I made the slider injection, which I've seen other people now duplicate out on the internet land, which is pretty awesome because, what is it? What is the sincerest form of flattery? Not copying. There's a better word for that. Duplication or something like that. When you move the injectors farther away, there's more time for the charge air temperature to change. So you gain power, which I did on that B series. And if you move it, you move it up the port on any of the intake manifolds, that seems to work very well. I don't know I've tried different injectors like spray patterns and things like that. And we tried with when I had the 1 liter Chevy Sprint motor, I was trying to change actually fuel mileage by increasing static pressure to hopefully improve atomization and change the droplet size and all that stuff. But we couldn't get it to, and I don't really have a good, test regimen for that to find out if we could improve power, but it's one of the things that we tried. Let's see. Boris, Richard, I'm considering a motor to put in my 70 Chevelle. Very nice car. That's kind of the car that I want, and also the one that my wife wants me to get, which is awesome. Me and my father watch your videos a lot and are split between a stock 454 displacement with a top end kit, a stroker 496, or a 427. The bigger motor is going to be better and going to be more fun. So I wouldn't put a 427 in there. I would put a 454 or a 496, which would be even better. And 600 horsepower, the bigger that you make the motor, the more drivable it's going to be. So if I'm going to drive that car around and I wanted 600 horsepower, I'd want the thing to be the most drivable combination that I could get. Cameron, did you get the 3800 heads back yet? I think that they're done from porting and stuff. I haven't physically grabbed them. And actually, the dimple question, Dan, since you've been commenting on this, I had a individual talk to me today about make a comment on something that I did about surface finish. It was about these are as-cast deals about how rough the surface finish is, and my comment on that, and I want you guys to let me know what you think about surface finish, whether it actually changes it. So let's take a set of ported heads, and let's assume for a second, and this is something that I pointed out to him, that it'd be very, very difficult to actually have them be exactly the same with only surface finish being the change, because that's a difficult deal. But if you could, in theory, if you had one that had like an ultra smooth surface, because when you port it, you want it to be mirror smooth. And then you had one that had the normal kind of cartridge roll rough finish. Would one of those things flow better because of the surface finish? And the thing that I pointed out to this guy, I said, look, how thick is the boundary layer there? If there's a boundary layer, the surface finish doesn't come into play with the airflow. And I don't think that you'll see anything from surface finish, with a possible exception of maybe changing, atomization things. But even then, I honestly don't. I think that the fuel, that it travels so fast through the port that the atomization already had to happen through the injector or through the carburetor. So, and people, I'm sure there's people that know a lot more about that than I do. My buddy just sold his 69 Yanko Clone 427. Very cool. I'm still waiting on the Buick 455. You and me both. I would like to see if Kenny Bell was right about the 1000 CFM theory, or did I run a thermal quad on my Buick sleeper for no reason? So do you think that is your APS 454, is your thought that the Buick, because it's a Buick, needs a big carburetor, even if it's only a 400 horsepower Buick? Because that's my other pet peeve, is that I get guys that tell me that the Cadillac has to have an 800 CFM carburetor. The Cadillac's not even making 400 horsepower. Do you know how much carburetor it needs to support 400 horsepower? Forget about the torque number. Forget how big the motor is. Now, the one thing I will say is on a bigger motor like a 455 Buick or a 500-inch Cadillac, an even better example, it will actually utilize a bigger carburetor and still drive well. Much better than a 400 horsepower 300-inch motor. But if they both make 400 horsepower, the 650 carburetor will be enough carburetor actually for both of those. That's my argument, but you guys can let me know what you think. Danny, any 392 builds? I've done lots of, let's see, I'll finish reading your thing. There's plenty of interest in building 5.7s just to make 392 power. Just wondering about cams and intakes. I heard a reported 6.1 intake can work well for the top end, but I'm skeptical. I don't have any Gen 4 is what I call them, Hemis. I don't have any of the newer ones. I only get junkyard ones normally. The guys from Motor Trend get all the cool stuff sent to them, and I'm the redheaded stepchild. All they do is ask me once in a while, hey, can we have your help on a turbo thing or whatever? So I will stand in and help them with that stuff. But I don't ever see any of those in the wrecking yard, and I don't make Motor Trend money, so I can't go buy a 392 from Dodge or from some wrecking yard company or something. So I don't think I've ever run one of those. I have run one of the newer 5.7s, the Gen 4 versions with the variable intake and then the variable cam timing. And when I say I run it, I mean they ran it, and then I just used their data. So as much as I would like to do that, they respond the same way that the other motors do. The 6.1 intake, maybe if it was ported, would be beneficial. I honestly think that the new truck intakes probably would do better than the 6.1. Having tested the 6.1 and the Magnum and the truck intakes on the earlier stuff, I kind of know what those do. There are lots of guys that there's a comment about the 427 versus a 454, and you get this a lot. Like you get this with 327, 350 guys on small block Chevys, and you get with the 427, 454 guys. If you have a limit in the size of the motor that you can make, a 454 will make more power than a 427, just like a 350 will make more power than a 327. Nobody in any racing class is going to say, okay, I can either pick a 350 or a 327. I'm going to pick a smaller motor, because it revs. No, that's not the case. They're just going to rev the bigger motor, and it's going to make more power everywhere. Same with a 427 versus a 454. In the case of the LT1 350, the small block, versus let's say a 365 horse L76 327, there's more than the difference of the stroke there. There's more than a difference of the change in displacement. There's actually a change in camshaft, which that DZ302, the Duntov cam in the 327, is a bigger camshaft than the one that they use in the LT1. So it wanting to rev is actually a thing that's a function of both the displacement, because it has to rev, and because it has more camshaft. So it would want to make power up top. When I tested them, they both make very similar power at the peak. It's just that the bigger motor makes more power all the way through the curve. And we see the same thing with a 427 and a 454. James, I wouldn't use a 7875 to tow with. I'd use a smaller turbo, because you're running 7 or 8 pounds or whatever. You want the thing to be more responsive. I would not use a sloppy stage 2 camshaft. If that's your cam choice, I would pick something else. I would pick some sort of truck Norris cam or stage 1 truck cam, or even the torque cam, because if you're doing it for towing and you just want boost under towing in the very low RPM range, which is what you're going to be doing, a 7875 is a bigger turbo than you need for any of that. How much boost could a typical Holley double pumper handle, assuming it's already modded for boost? So what did you do to mod it for boost? The thing that you need to do is the floats are a problem. Sometimes shaft seal is a problem, but the rest of the carburetor you're not going to hurt with boost. So it would handle any amount of boost. the thing that you're going to worry about is what is the fuel flow for whatever size carburetor you have based on whatever kind of power output you're trying to get from your turbo combination. Alex, I like the symmetry of twins. Plus, I already have the manifolds. Then you definitely got to go for it. I like twin turbos too. Plus, you can say that when somebody asks you, "Do you have a turbo motor?" You say, "No, I have a twin turbo motor." And being able to say that is better than just having a turbo motor. Let's see. So do you like the Holy Ultra 950 you test with? Yeah, the guys from West Tech have 950, 850, 750, 650. They also have brawlers and all kinds of other things there. And that is the 950 is kind of our go-to for anything that's like, depending in 550 to 900 horsepower is kind of the range for that carburetor. It works good. Imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. That's what I was trying to think of. Kyle, the new Gen Hemis have fantastic cylinder heads, but they don't see. I keep rocking back on this thing, but they don't seem to produce the power that's expected. I think that they do very well. The Hemi just needs more camshaft, just like an LS. It has lots of cylinder head. The factory intake manifolds are really good on Hemis. They just need the right camshaft. Not the wrong cam. Tyler, I've read you only need a rough surface in the port after the injector. Say your injector sprays into the beginning of the runner and the head. Does this mean the injector can be mirrored? Yes, it can. Jacob, can you tell me briefly how to set up a fuel system for an LM7 that has a returnless style fuel system? The fuel system that you have already will work. The only thing that you need to do is you have to have lots of fuel pump. You have to have a lot more than you have. And you have to have a lot of injector. The more injector you have, the happier life will be for the pump. You can run your factory system and make 1,000 horsepower. You don't have to put rails and all that stuff in it. It will go up to 1,000 horsepower. We've done that on a dyno before. Richard, you get a kick out of my stupidity today. I always like when a guy starts off a sentence like that. Removing the pilot bearing on my LS with the old school bread method. I have honestly never tried that. Launch the Welch plug through the crank end into the engine. I've done that with when we're trying to change camshafts. I've had lifters drop in and that kind of thing. I remember doing a 5-liter Ford and dropped the distributor shaft because I took out that pesky retainer that's on the distributor drive shaft. We don't need that in there, right? Well, I end up dropping that drive shaft into the pan and we just put another one in. I didn't want to take the whole motor apart, so I just dropped it another one, knocked the retainer off, put the shaft in, put the distributor in, and away we went. And I just left that thing laying at the bottom of the pan. Awesome. Monty, you've got a Blueprint 632 daily driving in my 70 Monte Carlo. Nice. OG Monty. I like it. Very reliable 10-second car. That motor makes good power. The mile per gallon is not great, though. I would imagine not on a 632 Monte Carlo. Casey, I'm working on an intake for a Datsun 510. So this is an L series motor. They have the injectors in the plenum firing down the runners about 1.5 inches from the runner opening. Runners would have been about 4 inches long. The problem is that it doesn't fit. I always wanted on my Z and my 260, I always wanted to wrap the runners around the top of the valve cover. I had Webers on mine and those work good, but there's fairly short runner. And luckily for me, and then you can't put too much stack on the Webers or Delorders or whatever kind of side drafts you are, Makunis. You can't put too much stack length on it to get the thing to run really well in the RPM range that you want. So I always wanted to run an EFI manifold and kind of wrap it around like you see on the Toyotas and stuff. And I think that it would be better. So Richard, I've gone with 243 heads on my LS2, 6 liter. That will work good. Barton says easy to do, but a dial length, fuel injector length would be great in an ITB with a raise and lower the length of the runner. The 4-rotor Mazda did that in their they adjusted the trumpet length. They didn't do it. They didn't have the intake the injector on top of the intake though that I know of. They just had a slider that adjusts the runner length. Formula One used to do that also in their motors, and that works very well. I made a slider to adjust the position of the injector, but the stack length stayed the same. We could adjust it manually, which I did because they had inserts. The guys from TWM had inserts to change the stack length of the runner, but we just did it manually and then move the injector. But I made a slide rail for the injector so we could move it in and out relative to the opening of the port of the ITB setup. It was pretty cool. I've always been told by the dinosaurs, port and polish and all gasket match from the carb to the valve. Okay. So Dan, if we run heads that have rougher surface finish, we should be able to see that on the dyno. That's what you're saying? I think rough port runners help with fuel separation with carbs, but PI sprays at the back of the intake valve anyway. I would agree with that. I mean, port injection isn't port surface dependent. Yeah, everyone hit the like button. Do you think AFR 220s are good for a 427 stroker? Yes, I do. Wall wetting affects emissions too. I would agree with that. Could you daily drive 1,000 horsepower running 20 pounds of boost? A daily drive what that makes 1,000 horsepower running 20 pounds of boost? You would, if you're daily driving it around or whatever, you're not doing it at the 1,000 horsepower level. You're doing it at whatever it makes it, part throttle, NA under no boost. So yeah, that's the great thing about a turbo motor and that's why I always pick the mild camshaft. If you put a small camshaft in it, then it drives around nice, and then you just turn the boost up. What are your thoughts on a D-stroke 6-liter LS? They're cool, but only because they're cool. They just make less power than a 6-liter does. Is it worth the lower piston speed? No, you don't. You shouldn't worry about piston speed. That's not a thing. Are we still talking about the carburetor size and pressure that we're running through that? If you're going to be trying to run 1,500 horsepower or 17 or 18 or 2,000 horsepower, you need a bigger carburetor than a 750 or an 850 like we use. I know that when Mike Miller comes in, they use a blow-through Dominator. So Andy, you're on the Theraflu tonight. Nice. My engine builder says I don't need a boost reference. My carburetor for my blown big block Chevy just put 8.5 or 10.5 power valves in it. We run them on the dyno like that, but I don't know about driving around. I like to boost reference them if you're going to be driving it around. Can I put 8 injectors on a plate where the carb goes? For what? After a statement on towing, I have a sloppy stage 2 for sale. You're not towing with your LS2, right? Here's and people are bringing up, obviously we have people that are pro dimple porting and people that are anti dimple porting. My question is never like, does it work or doesn't it work? My question is are you at the limit of, because you always need to look at the big picture. So if you have cylinder heads that flow 300 CFM, let's say that you could get them to flow 304 CFM with dimple porting, whatever the number is. I don't care what the number is. If you have that on a 500 horsepower motor, it doesn't make any difference. None. It will make zero. It will change the power zero amount because you're not taking advantage of everything that the head has to flow already. You're not anywhere near that. And so unless you're getting at the absolute limit of what that head has to offer, which means that you got to be making more than 2 horsepower per CFM of peak flow, and that's not absolute, but it gives you a fairly good idea. Unless you're there, you shouldn't be worried about dimple porting. Dimple porting isn't magic. It's not going to, if you take a set of stock as cast like Vortex small block Chevy heads and you dimple port them, it's not going to do anything. Because especially if you're at the flow limit of the heads, you need to port the heads. That's the big thing. You need to make the heads flow more so that they'll support more power. Dimple porting or any other thing that you would do short of porting them and making them flow more air, that's not the big thing. That's a little thing. And guys want to argue about little things when the big thing is really the thing that we should be looking at. James, you should put a GT45 on there. Yes, Casey, that's true. That's very true. If you had a Bugatti Veyron, you could say quad turbo because that's when somebody says I have a turbo motor, like I have a Porsche turbo, and then somebody says I have a twin turbo, and then the Bugatti guy can say because he has a Bugatti, I have a quad turbo, and then you would be really somebody. Let's see. I gotta zoom down here. Andy, I saw that Skog and Dickey Performance, the 2,000 horsepower 6.6 liter that they displayed. That's a lot of boost, and that's a good combination. We knew that motor could make a lot of power. My wife's new Honda has a boosted big block 1.5. That's good that she got the big block version. It makes 180 horsepower. That's 1.9 horsepower per cubic inch at 18 pounds. Sweet. Who is your go-to custom cam guy for small block Fords? Preferably flat tap it. That would be me. Twin GT45s on a big block will change your mind about cheap turbos. Boost does work better than dimple porting, that's for sure. With a carb, you want to boost reference for blow through. You definitely do, but I think that the comment before was boost referencing the carburetor on top of a roots blower. If not, you definitely have to boost reference the carburetor because otherwise you won't have any fuel flow once you have boost that's higher than whatever your fuel pressure is. So you have 7 pounds of fuel pressure, which is pretty common for a carbureted application, and you get more than 7 pounds, all of a sudden the fuel won't flow into the carburetor. Randall, this is a very good comment, and it's very important for this group. Little things matter when you're spending $5,000 or more per horsepower increase for pro stock or that sort of level. That's 100% true. But the thing that I point out is we're not at that level. The people that are here that are asking questions about what cam to put on their Turbo LS are not there. In fact, the 5 or 10 people in the world that are there are not here. They're not asking me questions about how to make their pro stock motor go faster. They shouldn't be. If they are, they shouldn't be in pro stock. They should be doing something else because I'm not that guy. But that's my point. The information that I'm giving and the dyno testing I'm doing is for like the 95% of the people that are just regular guys. Pro stock guys are not going to go to the wrecking yard and get a wrecking yard motor and try to make 1,000,000 horsepower out of it with a turbo and find out if it's going to break. They don't do that. So there's no reason to argue about things that are at Formula One or pro stock or NASCAR level. All that technology is really, really cool, but it's not usable by the vast majority of people that are out there. Let's see. Somebody had a question about somebody had a comment about the stroker motor, and I always like to talk to people about the D-stroke deals. Isn't that the thought behind the D-stroke 6-liter higher RPM? No, it's not. Because you've de-stroked it doesn't necessarily mean you can run more engine speed. There's lots of guys running the standard stroke crank in a 4.8 or 5.3. You could do it in a 6-liter as well, that are running to 8,000 RPM or more. So de-stroking it doesn't allow you to do that. You can already do that, and you can do that with a bigger motor. The thing is, on your way there to whatever RPM you're going to run, you're going to make more power. And also, oh yeah, you don't have to run there to make more power. The smaller motor, like if you compare a stock 4.8 and a 5.3, the 4.8 will make power at a higher engine speed, not because it likes to rev, but because it has the same head and intake manifold and camshaft and compression as the 5.3 does, and it has to run more engine speed to make its peak power because it has the same camshaft and all that stuff. So it's not that that makes it better somehow because it has shorter stroke. It's that it has less displacement and that it has to make power at a higher engine speed, not because that's not actually a benefit. And it makes less power it makes less power than a 5.3 everywhere, but it makes less power, a lot less power through most of the range that most of the guys want to use. So in most cases, no. If you want to do a D-stroke motor, it would be because you think that short stroke motors are cool and you're okay with a guy with a regular 6-liter probably beating you. Daniel, what do you think about twin GT45s on a 5.3? I think it's a horrible idea unless you're trying to get 1,500 horsepower, because they'll make 700 or 750 a piece, and they'll support that kind of power level. They're also going to be laggy. If you want to make less than 1,000 horsepower, there's lots better choices for turbos than that. Dan, another good comment that shows at the very high end of stuff how important little things are, but again, not usable for most of the average people. Rough Ports helped us get the brake specific to in the 0.3s, which is really good. That means they're making lots of power and they're doing it very efficiently. In NASCAR, mileage makes a big difference too. Definitely does in NASCAR, also does at Le Mans and other places where they have to run all the time for a long period of time, and fuel stops are very, very important. So that's very important. But again, guys here are not, although I have had a few questions on brake specific fuel consumption, I'm not trying to tell people how to make lots of power and then also have to do it like on the least amount of fuel possible, because that's really not what 90 or 95% of the people are trying to do here. Admiral, my white goes are back ordered until February, so here's $5 towards the next mod motor video. The next one I was thinking about actually was a Kenny Bell A 5.4 liter or 5.8 liter. He did lots of testing on the GT500 motor, so I'm thinking about doing something like that. What AR turbine housing would you recommend for the GT45s on the 521? I don't know what they have available. Whatever the biggest one that they have available, I think that they only have one or two different ones. On the 521 is going to be fine. What boost setup gives the best low RPM torque? You tell me where you want like maximum torque production, and then I'll tell you what you should use. So a Kenny Bell GT500 that deserves another $5. Well, that's what we did. We did Kenny Bell upgrades to replace the factory blower, because the factory blower, you can take up to a certain level of boost. But then when you put a bigger, better blower on there, then all of a sudden you can make a lot more power, not surprisingly so. So, Mike, you're using a bone stock 365 horse 460 with twin GT45s just to prove a point that the 460 will make, that a stock 460 will make 1,000 horsepower. That's a high compression motor with not very much camshaft in it and really not great cylinder heads. It's just going to take a lot of boost to get there. Rough cam specs for a small block Ford 5.3 with AFR 195s and 7,000 RPM. I wouldn't put a flat tap in it. I would put a hydraulic roller in it probably. If you're even at 7,000 RPM, I think you could run one. To run 7,000 RPM, a 195 is going to take a good intake manifold, like a Super Victor probably. And then if you look at something that's going to be like that XFI 236 cam, 236, 248, and then maybe you could go a little bit more than that. It's not going to be real drivable. What do you think about rear mount turbos? I have videos up on rear mount turbos, and they work very well. Alan picked up an LQ4 today at my local yard for $20. How do you get that? 10-year anniversary, $10 to enter and $10 for any part. Nice. That's a score. Dude, I would give you $21 for that. Pulled the short block in 2 hours. Nice. What makes more power, solid roller or hydraulic roller? I think Westech has probably tested that. Typically, if they're exactly the same specs, I would think that the hydraulic roller would, only because you have no lash. So it would come down to whatever specs you're using for both of your test cams. Nice pull, Alan. That's so fantastic. Dan, we did run rear mount turbos, although mine were extreme rear mounts. Apparently mine were all the way back behind the car and into the next car that was driving behind them. Okay, guys, one more minute. I got to go see my girl. And maybe Joe Boo needs a refill. Please, somebody tell me what film that is from. Would a 657, 655 lift, 245, 256 duration, 108 LSA cam work in an LQ9 with AFR 265 heads? That camshaft will not fit stock piston to valve clearance. It probably won't even come close. Hey, Richard is a 95%er. Appreciate the insight for my first engine build. LR4, Summit 8971, 8719 R1 camshaft, stock heads, TBS intake, Holley HP running on E85. Nice. What about twin rear mount turbos? Yes, that video is already up. When I did the rear mounts, we did twins on it. Casey knows. Major League. That's right. Major League, Ghostbusters. Although, very good guess, though. One of the movies that Major League and probably Fifth Element are a couple of the and all of the Tremors movies are like my movies where I will sit down and just watch all of them. if there is a marathon going on, all of those movies are awesome. Got a favorite whiskey? No, I never. If I drink whiskey, normally Crown, maybe. Speaking of cam specs, you think a 251, 257, 600 or 595 lift, 112 is overkill for my 347 stroker at 7,000. No, that's going to make good power. It's not going to be terribly drivable, but it will be good. With twins on a 53, what fuel do you like? I would start with E85. I've never run methanol in anything, so I can't really comment about that. Can I load my tune from a Terminator into a Dominator and it'd be okay? Yes. If you're building a 6.2 Ford, what would you do? I would come ask you, Admiral, because obviously I've never done a 6.2 Ford. Tremors is on Tubi, and I've watched all of the Tremors movies because there's like 6 or 7 of them now, and you gotta love Burt Gummer. I mean, the guy's awesome. I like that he got a son, and just all of it's just nothing but great. Yes, if you have Crown, you definitely keep it in the freezer. Carlos, how much horsepower can you pull from a small gear? And yours will be the last question. I got to get going. How much horsepower can you pull from a small gear, small block Chevy 350 with just a blow through and a GT45? It depends on whatever that motor's starting with. We've run smog 350s, especially 2-barrel ones. They were only 229 horsepower. A typical one is going to be more like 250 horsepower. The GT45 clone will support more power than that motor will probably make. It will support 750. So if you think you can get that, good luck to you. I would suggest putting cam and springs and head studs and ring gap on it if you were trying to do that. A cam would go a long way on that, because if that's like a bone stock motor, it's going to have a really, really tiny camshaft in it, unless it's an L82. Alex, thank you very much. Thanks for the advice. Here's $20 towards the next big block Ford video. Definitely appreciate the massive amount of knowledge. The next big block Ford I do, I'm almost certain will be the 429, and I think it's a late 60s or 1970 429 that Mark Sanchez has been sitting around for a while. So that would probably be the next big block that I would run, and I'm excited about doing it. I think it would be cool. In fact, what I'd like to do is, I've been reaching out to people. I would like to use that motor to build a Super Cobra Jet replica. So if anybody out there has Super Cobra Jet heads that I can borrow, hopefully an intake manifold too, that'd be awesome, because it'd be really hard to find the matching intake manifold, because the Super Cobra Jet ports are about this freaking big. Ridiculous for the amount of power that it was trying to make. But I want to run one of those, and I want to run a stock one to see how much power a stock one was actually worth. Thank you guys for being here, and I will see you all tomorrow. Thanks for watching the videos. Obviously, go check out the one that I just posted, and I will see you guys all on Sunday.